The new geography of entrepreneurship. We'll talk about that today on Builders Live. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the co-founder and publisher of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. We know entrepreneurship has been booming for years. You've heard from us on that aplenty. We want to dig into where entrepreneurship is booming in particular. And to do that, we have fresh data and research from the good people at LinkedIn. And I get to dive into that with Sharat Raghavan. He's a director of data science and research at LinkedIn. Sharat, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Absolutely, Sharat. Calling live. Where are you live from? Tell me again.
I'm sitting in my wife's home office in Berkeley, California.
Thank you. Well, tell her thank you for letting us use the office.
She's traveling, so it allows me to use it. There you go.
Perfect. All right, sure. Help me set up with some of the fresh research you've been looking at, and maybe do it through the lens of young entrepreneurship. Why are you looking at this? What's the research, and what are you seeing as a top level?
Absolutely. So one of the things that's been really, I would say, taking the narrative right in the media and between a lot of people I talk to is when you look at AI and how AI is enabling a lot of people to start up businesses faster. It's like lowering the barrier to entry. So when you have that situation, there's a feeling that there's just more startups, more startup activity. So we at LinkedIn, we looked at our member base. The economic graph at LinkedIn is what we call it. It's the real-time representation of the labor force. And when we analyze that data, we tried to understand if there are trends in entrepreneurship that we can sort of divine. And one of the trends that we found is that, there's like a 70% year-over-year increase in, we call it entrepreneurial activity, people adding startups or founding, experiences to their profile. But specifically in some metros, like in the Bay Area, it's up over 150% over the past 5 years. And so this is quite a leap. And so we're seeing a lot of this. Now, some of these things won't become actual real companies, but some of them will. And so that's giving us some interesting insights about what might be happening to the world of work.
Have you been able to look backward and have any sense, do you think of this as relatively quality data? Are these signals telling us something, do you think?
Yeah, so we've actually looked at our entrepreneurial data and actually matched it to US Census data. Now, the US Census data is a higher bar, right? It looks at actually business applications.
And thank you for the good people of Census Bureau for that high bar. Thank you, good people.
Absolutely. So when you look at that data, it's also showing a growth in, I think, overall business applications. Our data is going to be obviously a much more expansive definition of what we think as a business.
Sure.
And so, but yeah, generally the trends are pretty consistent.
So talk to me a bit about where this is looking especially high. You mentioned Bay Area, which certainly already had a reputation for entrepreneurial zeal. It looked, in my cursory look at this data of yours, that lots of places that have strong entrepreneurial ecosystems are seeing more entrepreneurial activity. There is a stickiness to this. Tell me a little bit more about what geographies you've seen in the data.
Yeah, so you're right. The Bay Area is one of the things that always stands out when you look at venture capital money raised or startup activity. But we see cities like Dallas, Austin, Seattle, Phoenix is one of the data points actually that's coming up as one of the cities that we see a lot of entrepreneurs. And so it's pretty, I would say, kind of all over the place in terms of geography. Now, I think this goes sometimes in a little bit of ebbs and flows, like certain markets get more attractive, maybe their policy changes, cost of living is an issue. But I think definitely a trend, absolutely in sort of the post-COVID period is that people, have kind of, realize that you can migrate to different areas, start a business, even if it's a technology-driven business, really anywhere.
We technically have reported exhaustively on the entrepreneurship boom of the last 5 years for a separate conversation, but the quality ranges a ton. We see both real meaningful high growth startups and a kind of alternative to wage labor showing up as small LLCs. They both are showing up in, the non-employer entity and the fast growth are both showing up in these high rates of entrepreneurship. What I thought was interesting in some of your research is that the good American people seem to be saying that they feel entrepreneurship is accessible.
Mhm.
Many of the people we technically have reported on for years have spent their careers on trying to make entrepreneurship more accessible. Tell me
Mhm.
a little bit about that, around how much of 20 years of entrepreneurship platform building is
Mhm.
finally paying dividends in the last 5 years. You have any insight on that?
So I think the insight I can share some general trends on that. So
Yeah.
if you think about like what it takes to start a business, right? In technology, that's fundamentally changed. So you saw this back in 2005 with the launch of AWS, that it fundamentally changed the cost of compute. So you no longer had to like buy racks and racks of servers to launch your business and scale. That was a costly sort of endeavor. And so you saw a spurt in entrepreneurship after that event. You again saw a spurt, unfortunately because of COVID, that did free up a lot of people to like work in various areas. And you did see again another spurt in entrepreneurship, partly out of necessity. A lot of jobs were lost during that period. And so people started business and some of them stuck with those businesses. And I think with AI, again, speaking more for tech now, but with AI kind of lowering the barrier to entry, it's easier to develop an app, a website. You see a lot more tech focused businesses being started. However, you also see AI helping in a lot of, let's say, non tech businesses. You know, Imagine you're a hotel owner, right? I know folks that are using AI now to analyze data on occupancy and pricing to really understand their business and move faster, offer coupons, offer different rates of pricing, where before that analysis would take, many hours for them to do. People are building, websites to advertise their business. They're building marketing collateral and so forth. So I think, you know, structurally, the cost of a lot of this is coming down for especially solopreneurs. And so that's creating sort of this, kind of, I would say, I don't know, like a little bit of a renaissance in entrepreneurial activity that we see in our data.
So let's linger for that. Let's linger on that for a sec, because there is an open conversation around whether artificial intelligence will be net good for new firms or ultimately better for incumbents. That is an open debate, and I suspect a bunch of really bright graduate students are going to write great papers for the coming years on parsing this. Um,
Mhm.
I also know that, given the LinkedIn data, my assumption is this is mega regional, so I won't necessarily know if it's a more rural county or the urban center. It's regional data, and I get that. But maybe what gives you that optimism that AI is one of the drivers here? Of course, a big debate we're having nationally in these circles is when is AI noise versus real impact. Tell me a little bit more about why you are feeling optimistic that this is at present maybe one of the drivers for some new firm creation.
So there's this
Why
old
are you
saying,
scared? Why are
and
you not? Why are you betting on AI being good for entrepreneurship?
yeah. So there's this old saying, like when the anecdotes and the data diverge, go with the anecdotes. And
Mm,
I'm sure
mm,
you and your listeners and everyone knows people that have sort of started businesses and AI sort of helped them bootstrap that. And it just feels like it's out there. Now you actually asked a question about, incumbents versus new entrants. you know, I guess in the United States, I guess I'm more like if you look at the history of the United States and the innovation ecosystem, it's always been a pretty dynamic place. There's always been new entrants. You can go back to Clayton Christensen's, writings and books, and you see the innovator's dilemma. Like incumbents actually can't move as fast as a lot of the nimble startups. And so I do see this as a still a big advantage for a lot of small, nimble players to sort of really understand their customer deeply as well. I mean, one of the things that entrepreneurs do really, really well, I would say more so than big companies, to be honest, is that they get close to the customer and they try to understand where the problems lie. Like they're obsessed about product market fit. Right? They don't have a luxury of a big revenue stream. And
right.
so understanding deeply the problems that your customers have is something that is like, I think, uniquely powerful for an entrepreneur. And that's always going to be an advantage for them when they're competing. So that's the way I see it.
That line of yours around when the data and the anecdotes diverge, trust the anecdotes, is is an important one. I only get 10 more minutes with you, and I want to leave a chunk of time to focus on how younger, call it Gen Z founders' career paths seem to be evolving a bit. The portfolio career thing I want to come back to in a sec, but let me linger once more on the geography, because I think something that I thought was powerful, and one could imagine a world where if you're in the Bay Area and you hadn't already been entrepreneurial, how could there possibly be more people to find entrepreneurship spirit? And this data show there very much are. And I think one of the takeaways as I was looking through your work is a lot of hubs with sticky entrepreneurial climates, like them or not, were better at still finding more and leveling up. So for me, there was a message on, we know that entrepreneurship is contagious. Been great research from the good people at Kauffman Foundation going back decades on this. Entrepreneurship is contagious. Are there any other of those takeaways when you looked at what geographies were doing well? There's other, some of these markets you called out had good population gains. What other things, when you look at the geography of who appears to be leading the geography of entrepreneurship, are there other lessons or themes or takeaways about where what the geography teaches us or could teach us?
Yeah, that's a great call out. So that question, by the way, is like, it's obsessed researchers try to understand, and specifically it's obsessed researchers around Silicon Valley. Right. There was an article that was published a few years back in Scientific American called, why is Silicon Valley hard to replicate, or how do you replicate something like that? And part of it, if you actually look at a lot of the research, some of the research talks about the weather, the geography, the proximity to venture capital, the proximity to universities and good education, the people involved, the risk-taking culture, capital, like we just talked about venture capital a little bit earlier, venture capital being super critical for this. And so there are all these characteristics that sort of make it. It's not necessarily just one that drives us forward. But one of the ones that I think is super important is sort of networks. And, networks kind of, I guess I'm from LinkedIn, so yeah, it's obsolete, core to our business. But I don't just mean online networking. I don't mean like just sending connection requests, but like, actually building those like networks like locally, especially if you're in a micro, like in a business that's like you have to actually touch customers. That's really important to go out there and talk with them individually. And so the network, it really drives a lot of the gains that we're seeing, and a lot of peer knowledge being shared. So when I look at those markets that are sort of growing, when we look at our data, we see that the Bay Area leads in one really interesting metric. And that metric is about 1 in 7 new connections from a founder goes to another founder. And so is an indication of learning. And so they are maybe learning best practices. They're learning, where their next customers are going to be, and creating that network, whether it's in person or online, is super valuable. And so when I think about these other areas that are getting more sort of entrepreneurial hubs, I looked to that as a signal to see like, how are those networks being formed within entrepreneurial communities themselves?
Man, that's interesting. I got to linger there for a sec. Did you? Is that, I didn't see that in my initial look. Do you have that did you share that for other regions? Is that a real range, like the percentage of connections that are founder to founder?
So the Bay Area is number one. Other regions that you would think are pretty good in terms of the venture ecosystem, like Seattle, New York, they're also pretty high, not as high as the Bay Area, but pretty close. I think if I remember the data correctly, the Bay Area is around 14%, about 1 in 7 connections. Some of the markets are like 1 in 8, 1 in 10. But it starts dropping pretty dramatically as you go down the list of even the cities you think should be attracting more venture capital. That connection rate kind of follows a little bit lower. One of the other data points on connections is venture capital. Like the Bay Area has, I think, around 2 times around the founder to VC connection density compared to other locations we looked at. Again, that could be structural. Right? I'm not saying this is, as an economist, is that causal? Like, probably not. A lot of it's structural,
for sure.
But it does indicate that, especially for businesses that do need capital, right? They're very, very good and very, very successful at sort of reaching out to those players.
I'll be following up with you is I'm actually more stuck on the founder to founder connection
Mm,
data is super interesting. And I think even if it's just correlative, like I don't think it even necessarily has to be causal to be interesting. That can
absolutely.
still tell a story of if there's even just rough correlation. So super interesting there. I only have a couple more minutes with you, and I want to touch on something that we technically have been reporting a bunch about. There is we're making entrepreneurship more complex, which I think can be good, but I think there are risks. And so I
Mm,
want to touch on this idea of portfolio careers,
mm,
because I've talked to you know as well as I do, probably better yet, that it's a messy conversation when economists want to back their way into what kind of entrepreneurship is good, because it's a lot easier to get earnings data than it is to get like happiness or meaning data.
mhm,
And there's a version of the last 5 years, people who dropped out of the traditional workforce to do entrepreneurship for flexibility reasons. There's an optimistic story there. If I
mm,
feel fulfilled by doing elder care and I've gone out of the labor market, that could be a good story. But we also see some versions of like under earning, and it seems like entrepreneurship in some version is also masking some people who are falling out of our economy. And we technically are trying to report that out. One optimistic way you guys are talking about is portfolio careers. So tell me a little bit about like what portfolio careers is, this idea of Gen Z founders in particular. Just talk to me a little bit about that in this research.
yeah. So one aspect of that, what you're saying is absolutely like some people are looking to like, or I think the phrase is like stack incomes, right?
Mm.
Especially as costs go up. How do you think about like stacking flows of incomes, being more resilient in a way, if something goes wrong? Um, Another trend that relates to what you're talking about is that we've seen in our data that people now will hold 2 times as many jobs as they did than someone graduates that has graduated 15 years ago. And so people are just holding more careers over their lifetime. And so maybe that's a function of people, you know, having preferences to actually try different careers, some of it out of necessity, but maybe actually some of them out of interest. And for I guess a lot of Gen Z that we see in our data, you're right. They do think about their career in terms of a portfolio. They do, I think, want to have that resilience in the background in case, let's say, something goes wrong. Some of it is born out of necessity, like their jobs may have been affected in some way, so they actually have to go out and find another opportunity and create something for themselves. But I don't think that's unique to this generation. I think throughout times, if you look at the data, in terms of people holding multiple jobs, right? Like it's been as high or higher than it was now if you go back to other economic times, and so I don't know if this is like fundamentally unique to this time period, but it does stand out. And perhaps it stands out more because it feels like people can start at least like a solo business or a website or a brand much more quickly now because of a lot of the technology that's out there.
The, I only we won't be able to dive much deeper on it, but I've been back and forth with economist on this because he's pushed me when we've done this reporting that like the Fed data on the percentage of Americans holding two or more jobs is relatively steady. But
Mhm.
I think what we also see is how people process that question is looking different because if I brought down the cost of forming an LLC or otherwise,
Mhm.
and I'm taking what we might have in the past considered multiple jobs, and I'm passing it through an entity. To your point of anecdotes, I've interviewed those people who are effectively gigging,
Yeah.
but it's through an entity, and so it shows up for us as entrepreneurship, and it kind of stretches our meaning because I've spoken to those people where hey they feel fulfilled, they're maximizing their time, it's more flexible, their earnings might be lower, but that
Mhm.
seems like a net positive story. But
Mhm.
I've also spoken to those people who are in a bad place, and so I
Yeah.
think the
I
same
know.
data point I've seen play out good or bad, and that just seems like a harder place to get to. And so like maybe as I lose you here in a minute, help wind me up. This research, the geography of entrepreneurship, tell me how you view it more largely. Is it a positive note or not? Are you feeling optimistic? Um, what's your lasting takeaway of this, both the good and the threats that might loom?
Yeah. So my big takeaway from this is structurally, what has happened to the cost of starting a business? Just fundamentally. And I think for most people, structurally, that cost has gone down. Uh, and that is at least getting people to think about, you know, starting something new, experimenting on their own, experimenting with a friend. Whether that translate into actual employment gains is like the real question we'll have to track in the economy going forward. And that is something here where we are LinkedIn, like we are going to be tracking this entrepreneurial activity and see, for example, how many of these businesses actually go on and hire people and grow. That's a fundamental question that we're really curious about. So, but I think going back to that point, like what has happened on a structural basis, like it has definitely lowered the cost of experimentation. And so some of these businesses are going to be successful, some aren't. And that's something we'll just have to wait and see.
Sure, Raghavan, he's the director of data science and research at LinkedIn for a piece we're working on the geography of entrepreneurship. Sharat, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It was great.
See you next time, everybody. Bye.